I rescued a dying dog. Then he rescued me back. Strongest emotional pull. The rain fell in sheets, turning London into a blur of neon reflections and wet pavement. Arif pulled his coat tighter, the cold seeping through his clothes as he hurried toward the tube station. Another late night at the office, another empty evening ahead. At 28, he had the kind of life that looked fine on paper, decent IT job, tidy flat in Islington, but each day felt like a copy of the last, colourless and dull. He was halfway down Camden Road when he heard it, a whimper barely audible over the drumming rain. At first he thought it was the wind. Then it came again, sharper this time, a wounded sound. Arif slowed, scanning the darkened alley beside a shuttered kebab shop. There, wedged between a dumpster and the wall, was a shape, a dog. The animal was small, maybe a terrier mix, its fur matted with mud and rain. One of its back legs was tucked awkwardly beneath it, and when Arif stepped closer, the dog flinched, ears flat against its skull. "Hey," Arif murmured, crouching. "You okay?" The dog didn't move, but its eyes, wide and dark, locked onto his. There was no aggression there, just exhaustion. A thin cut ran along its muzzle. Arif hesitated. He wasn't a dog person. He wasn't much of a anything person these days. Taking in a stray meant responsibility, vet bills, a disruption to his already fragile routine. But then the dog shivered violently, a full-body tremor, and before he could second-guess himself, Arif shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the animal. The emergency vet clinic was brightly lit, smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. The receptionist barely glanced up as Arif rushed in, the dog cradled against his chest. "Car accident?" she asked. "I don't know, I found him like this." A vet took the dog to the back, leaving Arif in the waiting area with a clipboard of forms. Owner information. He stared at the blank lines. He wasn't the owner. He was just some guy who'd picked up a stray. 20 minutes later, the vet returned. "No microchip," she said. "He's underweight, and the leg's sprained, but no breaks, the cut's superficial, he's lucky." Arif nodded, unsure why he was still there. "You can leave him with us if you want," the vet added. "We'll contact a rescue." The dog chose that moment to limp back into the room, bandaged and subdued. It looked at Arif, then slowly wagged its tail, once, twice. Arif exhaled. "I'll take him." The taxi ride home was quiet. The dog sat pressed against Arif's side, its warmth seeping through his damp shirt. "What am I doing?" Arif muttered, rubbing his face. He didn't know the first thing about dogs. His flat barely had space for him, let alone an animal. Back at his apartment, he laid out towels and an old sweater as a makeshift bed. The dog circled twice before collapsing onto it with a sigh. Arif watched it for a long moment. "Guess you need a name." The dog lifted its head. "Rumi," Arif said, the word coming out before he could think. Rumi's tail thumped weakly against the towel. Arif sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. This was a mistake. He couldn't do this. Then a small weight settled against his leg. Rumi had dragged himself over, resting his chin on Arif's knee. Before Arif could react, the dog licked his hand. A single tentative touch. Something in Arif's chest tightened. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. For the first time in months, the flat didn't feel quite so empty. The alarm blared at 6:30 a.m. Arif groaned, rolling over to silence it, only to find a warm, furry weight already occupying his pillow. Rumi stared back at him, tail thumping against the sheets. "Morning to you too," Arif muttered, scratching behind the dog's ears. This was their routine now. Wake up, walk, work, repeat. The streets of Islington were quieter at dawn. Rumi trotted ahead, leash taut, nose working overtime. At every lamppost and hedgerow. At the first week, Arif had hated these walks. The cold, the early hour, the way Rumi would lunge at pigeons like they'd personally offended him. But now he noticed things. The elderly woman who fed the ducks by the canal every Tuesday. The barista at the corner cafe who remembered his order. The way the sunrise painted the brick buildings gold. Rumi paused to sniff a particularly interesting patch of grass. "Come on, mate," Arif said, tugging the leash gently. "We've got—" Rumi sneezed violently, then resumed sniffing with renewed vigor. Arif sighed. They'd be here a while. His flat looked like it had been burgled by a very enthusiastic toddler. The crime scene. One destroyed sofa cushion, a toppled lamp, and a single guilty-looking terrier mix sitting amidst the wreckage. Rumi. The dog wagged his tail, clearly proud of his handiwork. Her shred of fabric clung to his muzzle. Arif pinched the bridge of his nose. "That was my deposit." Rumi rolled onto his back, offering his belly in apology. Arif had never been to Hampstead Heath's dog park before. He'd never had a reason to. Now, he stood awkwardly at the edge of the fenced area, watching as Rumi immediately befriended a hyperactive spaniel. First time. Arif turned. A woman about his age stood nearby, holding a steaming thermos. Her own dog, a shaggy greyhound mix, lounged at her feet. "Is it that obvious?" She grinned. "You've got the look, like you're waiting for someone to tell you you're doing it wrong." She offered the thermos. "Coffee?" "I always bring extra." Arif hesitated, then accepted. "Thanks." Her name was Sarah. She came here every Saturday. By the time Rumi had exhausted himself chasing tennis balls, Arif had made 3 new acquaintances and actual plans for next weekend. The memory hit him while scrubbing mud off Rumi's paws that evening. 10 years old, kneeling beside a whelping box, as his father explained. "This one's yours." The puppy, small enough to fit in his cupped hands, had licked his fingers with a sandpaper tongue. "What'll you name him?" "Buddy," young Arif had declared. He hadn't thought about Buddy in years. The old Labrador had been his shadow until university, until life got too busy, until— Rumi whined, nudging his hand. Arif blinked. His cheeks were wet. "Sit." Rumi stared. "Sit. Sit." Rumi yawned. Arif waved a treat. "For God's sake, just—" The dog abruptly plopped onto his haunches, eyes laser-focused on the biscuit. Finally, Arif tossed the treat. Rumi caught it mid-air, then immediately bolted to the sofa and resumed chewing its armrest. Sarah, watching from the kitchen during one of their now regular coffee visits, snorted into her mug. "You know they have classes for this, right?" Arif hadn't meant to bring Rumi to work, but the sitter cancelled and his project deadline loomed, and now Rumi sat primly beneath his desk, behaving unnaturally well as Arif's boss eyed them. "Pets aren't technically allowed," Mr. Davies said. Arif braced for the reprimand. Then, "Is he friendly?" Rumi, sensing an opportunity, rolled onto his back for belly rubs. Mr. Davies, a notorious hard-ass, actually smiled. 2 hours later, the office had stopped by to pet the dog. Productivity plummeted. Morale skyrocketed. At the end of the day, Mr. Davies called Arif into his office. "That presentation you did last month, the security upgrade." Arif tensed. "Yes?" "We're implementing it company-wide. You'll lead the team." Arif blinked. Thank you." "Don't thank me." Mr. Davies nodded toward Rumi, who was charming the receptionist. "Thank your secret weapon." Walking home that evening, Rumi trotted proudly beside him, sporting a new bandana, courtesy of HR. Arif checked his phone. 3 new contacts added today, all colleagues inviting him for drinks. He looked down at the dog. Who rescued who? Eh? Rumi sneezed in agreement. The squirrel taunted them from across the path. Rumi's entire body quivered, his leash going taut as steel wire. Arif barely had time to tighten his grip before, snap, the leash slipped. Rumi, no. The world slowed. Rumi streaked across the grass, a blur of brown fur. The squirrel darted left, then right, then bolted straight into the road. Arif's heart stopped. A horn blared. Tires screeched. Then, thud. The sound was all wrong, too soft, too final. Arif was moving before he could think, legs pumping. His scream raw in his throat. The world tilts. Sky. Pavement. Sky again. Something warm trickles into his eye. The squirrel is gone. Footsteps pound closer. A familiar voice shouts words that don't make sense. Hands touch him. He tries to wag his tail. Look, I'm okay, but his body won't listen. Darkness creeps at the edges. A face appears above him, Arif's face, wet, shaking. Rumi licks the air. Don't cry. Arif cradled Rumi against his chest, the dog's breath coming in shallow puffs. Blood smeared his shirt. Hold on, he choked out, fumbling with his phone. Just hold on. The Uber driver took one look and floored it. Animal hospital, Arif gasped. Now! Rumi whimpered. His fur was matted, his breathing too fast. Arif pressed his forehead to the dog's side, counting each labored breath like a prayer. In, out, in, out. The car hit a pothole. Rumi yelped. Sorry, sorry. Arif's voice broke. His hands came away sticky. The vet techs moved like soldiers. Car accident. Yes, he ran into... Time of incident? Time of... 7 minutes ago, maybe. A gurney, gloved hands taking Rumi away. Arif stood frozen, blood drying on his hands. Fractured pelvis. Internal bleeding. Surgery, now. The vet's mouth kept moving, but Arif only caught fragments. Transfusions. Possible. Organ damage, 50% chance. The clipboard trembled in his hands. Estimated cost, $3,800. Just fix him, Arif whispered. The vet hesitated. Even if he survives, recovery will be... Fix him. A beat, then a nod. As they wheeled, Rumi away, the dog lifted his head weakly. His tail gave one half-hearted thump. For you. The doors swung shut. Arif collapsed into a plastic chair, his hands empty. The apartment looked like a medical supply store had exploded. Arif stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed. His handiwork, yoga mats covering hardwood floors, foam padding on every sharp corner, a custom dog wheelchair parked by the sofa like a tiny Rolls-Royce. The vet had said Rumi might never walk normally again. Arif refused to accept that. A whimper came from the carrier by the door. Rumi peered out, his shaved flank stitched like a poorly mended teddy bear, his back legs wrapped in blue bandages. Welcome home, Trouble, Arif whispered, carefully lifting him out. Rumi sniffed the air, ears twitching at the unfamiliar smells of antiseptic and new plastic. When Arif set him down in the wheelchair harness, the dog froze, confused by the contraptions supporting his hindquarters. It's okay, Arif murmured, offering a treat. You'll get used to it. Rumi took the biscuit gingerly, then promptly rolled sideways into the coffee table. Sarah from the dog park showed up unannounced on day 3 with a casserole and a link. Just look at it, she insisted, shoving her phone at Arif. He blinked. At the screen, Help Rumi Walk Again blazed across a GoFundMe page, complete with before-after photos of his once energetic terrier. The donations ticked upward even as he watched. $20 from Spaniel Mike, $50 from the cafe barista, $100 from an anonymous donor labeled Mr. Grumpy Boss. I can't. Arif's throat tightened. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Let people help. By week's end, the fundraiser had cleared $5,000. The vet bills were paid. The animal rehab center smelled of chlorine and wet dog. First session's just about getting him comfortable, the therapist explained, as Arif lowered Rumi into the warm pool. The moment Rumi's paws touched water, he transformed. His front legs paddled eagerly, his wheelchair bobbing behind him like a life raft. For the first time since the accident, his tail wagged properly, sending droplets flying into Arif's face. That's it, Arif laughed, swiping water from his eyes. You remember how to dog. Rumi barked, splashing toward him as if to say, I never forgot. Elena from flat 4B started appearing at odd hours. First it was just borrowed sugar. For my tea, she lied, eyeing Rumi's wheelchair. Then it was unsolicited advice. My cousins, her physio, try this massage technique. By the 3rd week, she was showing up daily with homemade dog treats, shaped like tiny bones. You're hovering, Arif accused one evening as she watched him adjust Rumi's harness. Elena crossed her arms. You're stubborn, that dog adores me. As if on cue, Rumi licked her hand, his tail thumping against the floor. Traitor. Small victories piled up. The day Rumi managed to drag himself 2 feet without the wheelchair. The first time he barked at the postman again. The miraculous morning, Arif woke to find Rumi had somehow climbed onto the bed unaided, his wet nose pressed against Arif's cheek. But the back legs still wouldn't cooperate. He may always need support, the vet warned, during their 6-week checkup. Arif nodded, but that night he lay awake, staring at the wheelchair in the moonlight. Elena suggested Brighton on a whim. Salt air's good for recovery, she claimed, already packing towels. They went at sunset when the crowds had thinned. Arif carried Rumi past the pebbles to where the sand turned damp and firm. He set the dog down gently, keeping one hand under his belly. Ready? Rumi sniffed the brine-soaked air, his nostrils flaring. Somewhere down the beach, a seagull cried. Then, a twitch in his back leg, a shift of weight. Arif held his breath as Rumi took one wobbling step. Then another. Elena gasped. Step. Drag. Step. Rumi's gait was lopsided, his legs trembling like a newborn foal's, but he was walking. Properly walking. Arif sank to his knees in the wet sand. Rumi turned, panting, and licked the tears streaming down his face. In the distance, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the waves gold. The sign above the door read, "Second Chances Shelter" in cheerful blue letters, slightly crooked from where Rumi had helped during installation by enthusiastically wagging against the ladder. Arif adjusted the leash on his now faded grand opening t-shirt as a crowd gathered outside. 1 year ago, he'd been a man who barely looked up from his phone. Now he was about to open a rescue center with 12 dogs, 2 full-time staff, and "Stop fidgeting," Elena whispered, squeezing his hand. Her engagement ring caught the morning light. A wet nose nudged Arif's palm. Rumi sat proudly at his feet, his once-damaged back legs strong enough now to leave muddy paw prints on clean floors. The scar along his muzzle had faded to a thin white line, a badge of honor. Sarah from the dog park pushed through the crowd with Spaniel Mike in tow. "Took you long enough," she teased, handing Arif a giant ribbon to cut. Mr. Davies, now retired, arrived with a checkbook and a gruff, "Don't make me regret this investment." Even the Uber driver who'd raced them to the hospital that terrible night showed up, holding a squeaky toy shaped like a taxi. Arif's throat tightened. He looked down at Rumi. "Ready?" The dog barked, his tail a metronome of joy. Mornings began with chaos. Arif waded through a sea of wagging tails and upturned food bowls, Rumi acting as self-appointed supervisor. The shelter specialized in difficult cases, dogs with missing limbs, trauma histories, or just bad luck. Today's intake was a trembling greyhound rescued from a racetrack. "Easy, boy," Arif murmured, offering his hand. The dog flinched. Rumi stepped forward. Not too close, just present. He lay down, showing his belly in canine diplomacy. Slowly, the greyhound uncurled. Elena appeared with coffee, kissing Arif's flour-dusted cheek. The kids group arrives in 20. The children's hospital visit was Rumi's favorite. He wore his official therapy vest with gravity, allowing tiny hands to pat his head without complaint. Today's group included a quiet girl in a wheelchair, her arms dotted with IV bruises. "She doesn't talk much," the nurse warned. Arif watched as Rumi approached, dropping his favorite ball in her lap. The girl blinked, then a smile, a whispered, "Good dog." Rumi rested his chin on her knee, his tail sweeping the floor in slow arcs. Later, as they left, Arif had to swipe at his eyes. The flat above the shelter was smaller than Arif's old place, louder and infinitely warmer. Dinner involved 3 dogs begging against rules, 1 cat Elena had smuggled in, "She adopted us," and Rumi sitting patiently until his bowl clicked down, a hard-won victory after months of training. As Arif washed up, Elena wrapped her arms around his waist. "Happy?" Through the window, he watched Rumi herd the newer rescues into their bedtime crates, his movements confident, his gait barely uneven now. "Yeah," Arif said. "Weirdly, yeah." One foggy autumn morning, Arif took the long route through the park, the same path where he'd first found a shivering stray years ago. Now, 6 dogs trotted beside him, their leashes a tangled rainbow. Rumi, off-leash as always, limped slightly on cold days but never slowed. At the bend in the path, a young man hurried past, head down, shoulders hunched, a mirror of Arif's old self. Rumi paused, looked back. Then he trotted after the stranger, nosing gently at his clenched hand. The man startled, looked down. Arif smiled. He likes biscuits. The cafe up front keeps some behind the counter. As the man knelt to greet Rumi, something in his posture softened. The dogs tugged Arif forward toward home, toward more work, toward whatever came next. He took one last glance over his shoulder. The stranger was scratching Rumi's ears, the first hint of a smile on his face. Turns out, Arif murmured to no one in particular, I didn't rescue Rumi, he rescued me.